Today on CityCast Nashville, I'm joined by Afton Bain, the Democratic State Representative for District 51, which encompasses much of East Nashville and downtown. She's the sponsor of House Bill 2 for the upcoming Tennessee General Assembly session, which would eliminate the state's grocery tax. Her bill was quickly matched by similar legislation from a Republican state rep, with one key difference. We'll talk about it. Plus, Afton breaks down how she thinks Tennessee's corporate tax policies leave families across the state at a disadvantage. And she also gives us her predictions on what the 2025 session, which begins January 14th, may have in store. It's Tuesday, December 17th. I'm your host, Marie Cecile Anderson, and this is what Nashville's talking about. Afton, what is Tennessee's grocery sales tax rate at the moment, and how does it compare to other states?
Yeah, so it differs depending on locality, but there is a state portion and then there is a local portion. And so the state portion is around 4%, and combined with the local sales tax option, Tennesseans can pay upwards of 6.75% on sales tax on essential items like bread and milk. So it can really add up over a year, especially for working families. And so last year we passed a bill to allow municipalities to opt out of the sales tax, I think up to maybe 4%. And this year, the dueling bills, which I'm sure we'll discuss, have to do with eliminating the state sales tax. We saw Republican supermajority states all across the country actually eliminate their tax, such as Oklahoma. And Republican supermajority states like Mississippi and Kansas are also considering doing that this coming session.
Why is Tennessee holding on to this so dearly? Do we need the money, really? Are we really that desperate?
Excellent question. I love this question because what it does is it provides a framework as to why we're so reliant on sales taxes. I like to say that Tennessee is 13 sales taxes in a trench coat. But I was waiting for the laugh.
That's a good one.
That's a good one. So when you have an economic system that is consists of compounded sales taxes, it is one that's really regressive because the lowest income earners pay the highest proportion of their income on sales tax. We also have found via Department of Revenue letters, which we hope to debut in January, that a lot of companies that file over $1 billion of federal taxable income are not paying certain taxes in Tennessee. And so the way that we approach the grocery tax bill on our side is one of saying, hey, maybe corporations in the state of Tennessee should be paying what they owe, just like the working mother going to Kroger to buy baby formula.
All right, so I want to get real specific and know, what does the grocery tax actually pay for?
Yeah, so it actually goes into the general fund, which is then dispersed towards our education portfolios, et cetera. So all of the sales taxes are pulled together, and then that's how we pay for a lot of the programming in the state.
And so according to the bill that you introduced recently, you said that if businesses start paying taxes they're supposed to, it would make up for the lost grocery tax revenue.
Yeah, so just from history. So since the Republican supermajority has been in leadership, they have believed and held at the utmost supreme leader of trickle-down economics. Unfortunately, trickle-down economics don't trickle down, right? As we have come to conclude. And so they have passed and amassed a buffet of tax cuts for the wealthy, which included revising the inheritance tax, revising the hall tax, and then they have what they say are tax cuts for corporations, right? But what we saw this past session was basically the Republican leadership hand-delivering $1 billion of hard-earned Tennessee taxpayer money to the biggest companies. A Tennessean report showed that 60% of the companies receiving the franchise tax refund are actually located out of Tennessee. So they have been dwindling and eroding our corporate tax base so much that inevitably there's no money left this year. But how that relates to our bill is we started with a framework of, hey, why don't companies pay what they owe? All of us pay taxes. Small business owners in my House district, in House District 51, pay almost 30% of an effective tax rate. Why aren't these companies paying? And then we just said, well, how much money can we generate via perhaps maybe creative accounting that other states have adopted in terms of something really wonky called worldwide combined reporting. And then the second element is corporate minimum tax. And so if companies are not paying the excise or franchise tax, this will kick in and they'll have to pay something. And we're hoping, fingers crossed, that the revenue generated from these two funding mechanisms will total the amount we need to get rid of the grocery tax.
Magic.
Yeah.
Well, so
it's girl math. No,
math.
It's legislative girl math. Yes. It's been funny because I'm sure, I came in a special election. Before this cycle, I was the newest member. And, I wear my heels and I've got my blonde hair and I come in, I'm like, let's talk tax reform, which I'm sure is so annoying to so many of my colleagues because they just want me, to be there. But I showed up at the state funding board meeting, which for your audience are basically the bona fide superstars of Tennessee fiscal policy. It's the comptroller and I think two more people, and they sit on a board and they determine what our revenue projections look like, how much money we can take, what, basically our projections for the next 2, 6, 10 years. And I show up in my colorful outfit. I'm the only one wearing color in the back. And I'm just, listening intently. I'm sure I was their worst nightmare, but sorry.
And looking fabulous. I love it. Well, so I want to get into the bill that Republican Representative Elaine Davis has just introduced, House Bill 21. A response to your bill. Does that feel good that there's some movement on that side of the aisle, thanks to you, maybe?
Well, and to be fair to a lot of my Democratic colleagues, and on both sides, there have been legislators that have proposed the elimination of the grocery tax in perpetuity, right? Historically. Right. However, there was never any organizing behind it. And so what we did this past year is we had an organization that organized Tennesseans outside grocery stores across the state in March, having people petition inside their grocery store, hey, don't you think Tennessee should eliminate the grocery tax? And then it was like catnip for local reporters, right? Because Tennessee is facing one of the highest inflationary costs when it comes to groceries in the country. So everyone is affected by this. And then we used the election to make it a campaign issue. And so you saw a lot of Democratic and Republican candidates, including this in their platform. And lo and behold, what happened? And so this is my chef's kiss, organizing works, because it does. And this is such a testament to every Tennessean that has called their legislators, that it stood outside their grocery stores on that cold, frigid Saturday in March. And I really look forward to seeing what materializes as a result.
Well, one thing I just wanted to highlight is that hers would eliminate taxes on food items and ingredients, but continue taxing things like ready-to-eat meals, prepared foods, candy, alcohol, tobacco, which I'm like, okay, sure. But then diapers? This is where, working families, they just can't catch a break, it seems.
No.
And do you know if feminine products are included in that as well?
I didn't see it, but I need to go through the bill with a wide tooth comb. And just to flag for also your audience that there will be multiple iterations of both of these bills as it moves through, as the sausage is getting made. And so, for example, in Rep. Elaine Davis's bill, as well as my bill, and Senator Charlene Oliver's, we haven't explicitly stated the funding mechanism yet because we're still working on it. And so right now is the process where legislators are talking to the economists, talking to Fiscal Review, talking to the lawyers to make sure that they get their bill in. But I do have a really funny story, if I can say. It's very cute. So we had heard that Senator Jack Johnson and Leader Lamberth were to put forward for the first bill of the session. So this is HB1, SB1, that it was going to be the voucher bill, okay, which I'm sure you've discussed on this podcast. And so I was adamant about our bill being number 2. And I worked, I was running around the legislature for 2 weeks trying to get this bill ready, meeting with the attorneys. In what form can I get it so that I can turn it in the next day? So for your listeners, the first time you can file a bill is 8 a.m. the following day of the election on Wednesday. So I am nursing a hangover. I'd been in Clarksville the night before. Right. I jump in my Jeep. I run. I'm driving furiously over to Cordell Hull. I park. I run in. I grab the bill docket. I'm in my office signing my name, running down to the clerk's office. And I slam the bill docket on the floor. And they look at me and they're like, Rep. Bain, you're the only one in the building. You don't have to be. you're in 11, you need to take it down to a 2. I'm like, okay, sorry. But inevitably, I was able to file it. And so Senator Oliver and our bill is now number 2 in the docket, which I think is just, it's so important for the Tennessee public to see the contrast between their bill, which is, private voucher bill, right? Voucher vultures, demoralizing and eroding our public school system. And the contrast, which is, hey, why don't we hold corporations accountable and give working Tennesseans a tax break?
Going into session 2025, how are you getting ready for another year of working as a Democrat under a Republican supermajority?
I know things feel so dire and awful right now in Tennessee, but I wake up every day thinking about how to own the Republican supermajority when it comes to policy. And so I'm sure we'll discuss maybe the abortion bills, but that's really, I'm really grateful for the opportunity to serve, because you couldn't have a better person in this position in the right time and right place in Tennessee political history. So
what does it look like to compromise with the supermajority?
I think a case study is I was able to pass a bill last year, which is unheard of as a freshman in the super minority. And I'm not going to give my tips and tools for the trade, but I will give it to my freshman colleagues. But what I learned through that process is, even though we are in the super minority as Democrats, that some ideas, and especially if they're not these messaging bills, right? If they're more granular, if they're more myopic in scope, if they're deeply entrenched in a story from a constituent, that perhaps it actually moves through. And that's exactly what happened with my bill. I received an email from a constituent who wanted to ensure that daycare facilities notified parents, enrolled parents and families, and on the waiting list, that the daycare facility was closing. But just to highlight like what compromise looks like, is the start of the bill was, okay, daycare facilities need to notify parents within 60 days. And how eventually a compromise and the sausage was made was that basically it was as practicable as possible. So that shows you that it really, you have to take in a lot of feedback, a lot of negotiation, a lot of compromise to get the bill out to the floor and then get it signed by the governor. And that's exactly what I had to do. However, when it comes to trans rights, when it comes to abortion, there is no compromise. And so, we're going to see, especially this next session, I'm really curious to see kind of what from the bowels of their ideas and their platforms they pull up to generate for legislation, because there's just no compromising when it comes to a few things in the legislature.
So will grocery tax repeal pass in some form this next year?
So right now, and this is what I was in musical theater. So I love like performance, and like I did a lot of political theater before I was a legislator. So I love like the mechanics as to what people see and what's going on, right? But what's behind the scene is that there's a lot of chess moves, right, happening as to who comes out on top. I will say the bottom line in all of this is that we have stagnant revenues in Tennessee because they have eroded the corporate tax base and there's not enough money coming in. And so there's not just $1 billion lying around to eliminate the grocery tax. And I have serious doubts that the Republican leadership and Governor Lee have a robust proposal to pay for it. We have a way to pay for it, but they don't. So I'm really curious to see how these negotiations unfold, and if Republican leadership is just basically putting on a show, or if they intend to follow through.
And legalizing marijuana will never be something that they are into that could make up for.
Oh man. Well, I'm working on a bill right now called Pot for Potholes, where we legalize marijuana, tax it at X%, and then that goes back into the general fund for transportation, which I think is brilliant, right? Like, I love it. I think what's something to be said about the dynamics of the Tennessee General Assembly, it's still very religious. There are, it's majority, if not 99% Christian, which is why we see a lot of, and I know you had Senator Campbell on to talk about Christian nationalism, but why you see this intersection of far-right ideology and, Christian heritage. A lot of what's going to happen this next session, I think, will be around criminalization and surveillance, enhanced criminalization and surveillance, which is line in step with what we saw last session.
When does the legislative session begin next year?
It starts on January 14th, and so we will gavel in that day, and then it's a kind of chaotic, frenetic few weeks in terms of desk switching on the House floor. Some folks will be moving offices, committee reshuffling. So there's just a lot of kind of school is in session, orientation, and then the work begins in February and March when we start committee hearings.
What are you most concerned about? I know you've mentioned a couple of things.
I've been adjacent to the reproductive justice organizations for quite some time in Tennessee and have been fighting, basically the erosion of our reproductive freedoms in this state for a decade. And I'm always shocked because I think it can't get worse. And then it does. And I think the fight, right now there's one over abortion and that'll be in perpetuity. I think for your listeners, the bad bill last year was the abortion trafficking bill, which would prevent, inevitably is already illegal to kidnap young people and take them out of state, right? But the goal of the bill was to stoke fear that people can't travel across state in seeking abortion care. And then the other part of it was around our First Amendment rights. And so they said, basically, if you are recruiting people, which they wouldn't define, is that talking about abortion? Is that passing out resources? Is that standing on the corner of Broadway next to Tootsie's, which I did, and pass out information about abortion? Is that recruit? A local Nashville attorney and I filed a lawsuit against the state of Tennessee, and an injunction relief was granted, which means we won the first part of our First Amendment case in this bill. But we just saw a pretty dystopian, as I called it and referenced it, bill by Representative Gino Bolso, which is called the Unborn Sanctity of Life Act 2025, which goes so far to hold those that are giving out medication abortion to a civil penalty of, I believe, $5 million. But it's just this further criminalization of activity that should be our God-given right. And so I saw that he had filed this, and I had been working to prepare the Reproductive Freedom Act in coalition with a lot of groups in Tennessee who helped me with my legislation and talking points, et cetera. And it was ready. So once again, I saw he filed it, and I went down and I filed it right after him because it shows a contrast as to what we want to see in the future of reproductive justice movement in the state of Tennessee versus their vision, which is one of locking up, criminalizing women, people who can get pregnant, and kids. And it's really, really, really scary. But I have a very funny story. So during the last session, I carried this bill last session, and I was in my office and I hear a knock at the door and I answer it. It's this gentleman. He goes, I'm with Governor Lee's office. And I go, oh, and he goes, I want to let you know that the governor philosophically opposes your abortion bill. And I go, oh my God, thank you so much. You came all the way down here to tell me that? I am so, wow. Thank you so much. I was elated. I'm that is he took the time to come down and tell me that. And then he looked at me, he goes, and by the way, I'm a constituent of yours and I think you're doing a good job. Oh. And I go, okay. So it is the most toxic work environment you could possibly imagine. And it is not fun. The initial comment when you start is, are you having fun yet? It is not fun, especially for minorities. However, you have to kind of carve out these moments where you find joy and laughter, because otherwise you'll cry.
Well, let's go back to your bill. Can you tell me a little bit more what it included?
It repeals up to, I believe, 20 laws we currently have on the books around abortion, which just tells you how draconian our current abortion ban is. And it states that every person has the fundamental right to make decisions about their own reproductive health care free from government interference, which, I guess I'll say this, but I just want the government out of my snatch. I don't understand. I just don't understand it. And so this is a bill that Senator London Lamar and I had filed last year. Just kudos to her. She had a pretty devastating miscarriage and stood up and testified for this bill. And it was just heartbreaking to hear her personal testimony as to how dire the situation was. I don't know what the breaking point is. I think for also your readers. Oh yeah, you do have readers.
We have readers. We have a newsletter.
Okay. I forgot. You have an email. The Republican supermajority has basically passed a lot of legislation that has either been litigated, and as Representative Gloria Johnson says, we pass lawsuits, not laws, which is true. But it's important to note that they have passed legislation as red meat to their base, right? And we have not seen this legislation be implemented. So, for example, we have an abortion ban, right? But we have not seen a district attorney criminalize someone for miscarrying and throw them in jail. So I think that's kind of the next realm that we are going to experience in Tennessee is people being thrown in jail, perhaps for drag, perhaps for miscarrying. And whereas we observed that a lot of this legislation was just passed to stoke fear and to incite misinformation, that perhaps we'll actually see it be actualized. So that's something to be on the lookout for in the next few months.
Oh, good. Fun. Well, I'm going to switch gears and move to something else that's been on my mind a lot. I have a lot of friends in Nashville who are parents, and I've been having a lot of conversations about how the Trump administration is going to affect them next year, their kids, the education, but specifically gun reform. And so last year, virtually no gun reform bills were passed. Do you think we'll see any meaningful action on this issue in the upcoming session?
I have yet to hear of any substantive gun reform proposal coming from Republican leadership.
Okay. With the potential policy shifts under Trump's presidency, especially regarding mass deportations of undocumented immigrants, what steps will you take to protect your constituents?
I want to give a massive shout out to my constituents, and I might get emotional. I am so impressed with them and the way that they have stepped up and are already preparing for what's to come. I have a mother in my district who is the advocacy chair at her local elementary school PTA, and she immediately jumped into action and is organizing, her ESL teachers and the families and ensuring that they are fully prepared to handle what's to come should there be undocumented students pulled out of school next year. And I'm so impressed with how people are stepping up and organizing for the future they believe we deserve. And so on my end, I want to flag for your listeners that I'm in a very unique position because I actually worked for the biggest resistance organization during the first Trump administration. And so I learned a lot, and I really feel like I'm uniquely situated to handle this, especially since I'm connected to a national apparatus that provides a lot of information. So what I plan to do, and I'm going to ask your listeners in this moment for this next Trump administration, what is your superpower? What is the one skill that you maybe, you haven't really leveraged or used to organize, and how can you use that to organize what is 6 feet in front of you? Because the more connective our tissue is, the more connective our community is, the more resilient we're going to be to what's to come. And my superpower is one of having a lot of experience, being able to distill tons and onslaught of information at the federal level, and then kind of moving through that with an analysis so that I can give my constituents and folks across the state the best information possible as to how to best prepare and mitigate the risk to our communities that are going to be impacted. I'm really curious to see what happens in Tennessee because we are a Republican trifecta. And I imagine that a lot of the punitive hostility that we'll see at the federal level will be directed towards blue states with blue cities. Things are already bad here. Like, we are already living Project 2025. We're having to drive out of state for care. Things are going to get worse, but I'm really curious to see what that looks like in the next year or so.
So what are you most hopeful for?
Oh, man. As Mariame Kaba says, one of my favorite abolitionists, that hope is a discipline and you really have to work on it every day. I look to my constituents that I have this little folder in my phone of nice things constituents have said. And I feel really grateful because I can't imagine representing a purple district where maybe you're a little more tested, but I go out in public and people are like, what are you doing for self-care? Are you okay? Do you need a break? I'm like, oh, so sweet. So I feel very grateful in that my constituents know that I'm carrying a heavy load for them. They're very respectful of my boundaries, which I've been very grateful for. So, but in terms of hope, I think, watching people and Tennesseans with no organizing experience step up and really kind of organize their neighborhoods in preparation for what's to come. I think we're going to see a lot more anecdotes of just people stepping up and showing up, right? Without, professionalized organizing experience that I have. And so with that, I know that I feel very, recognizing the harm and just chaos that is to come. I feel grateful knowing that I have my community with me, and that really is a testament to the spirit of Nashville.
Thank you, Afton.
Thanks, Marie.
That's all for today here on CityCast Nashville. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our Hey Nashville newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Toodles!